In the corridors of power, where every word is measured, every gesture analyzed, and every silence scrutinized, there comes a moment when the absence of sound becomes deafening. On a crisp October morning in 2024, as autumn leaves danced outside the windows of Windsor Castle, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, made a decision that would send shockwaves through the British monarchy, the government, and millions of hearts across the Commonwealth. What started as routine royal duties would transform into the most significant constitutional crisis in modern British history. The couple who had embodied duty, service, and unwavering loyalty to the crown were about to demonstrate that sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what you say, it's what you choose not to say. For 72 hours, their silence would speak louder than any royal proclamation, any parliamentary debate, or any media storm. It would force a nation to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the price of service. It would challenge everything the British people thought they knew about their beloved future king and queen. This is the story of how two people's refusal to speak changed the course of a 1,000-year-old institution and left an entire nation holding its breath, waiting for answers that would redefine the very essence of what it means to serve one's country. What could possibly drive the steady, reliable Prince of Wales and his devoted wife to choose silence over duty? What secret burden had they been carrying? And why did their decision to remain quiet become the loudest statement the royal family had heard in generations? The answers would surprise everyone, including themselves. Catherine Welsh, now known to the world as the Princess of Wales, had always understood that marrying into the royal family meant trading her privacy for purpose. But nothing could have prepared her for the morning of October 15th, 2024, when she discovered a file hidden deep within the royal archives that would change everything she thought she knew about the monarchy she had pledged to serve. The day began like countless others at Adelaide Cottage, their modest four-bedroom home on the Windsor estate. William was already dressed in his naval uniform, preparing for a ceremonial ship commissioning in Portsmouth. Their three children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were getting ready for school, their laughter echoing through the hallways as Catherine helped them with their breakfast. The ordinary chaos of family life provided a comforting backdrop to their extraordinary circumstances. Catherine had developed a morning routine that grounded her in the midst of royal obligations. While William reviewed his daily briefings, she would spend 30 minutes in their small study, catching up on correspondence and reviewing her own schedule. It was during one of these quiet moments that her private secretary, Amanda Morrison, approached her with an unusual request. "Your Royal Highness," Amanda began hesitantly, "there's been a discovery in the Royal Collection archives, something that predates the current filing systems. The archivists believe you should see it before anyone else." The thick manila envelope Amanda handed her bore no identifying marks except for a royal seal that Catherine didn't recognize. Inside, she found documents that made her blood run cold. Financial records, correspondence, and photographs spanning 7 decades revealed a pattern of behavior that contradicted everything the royal family publicly stood for. The documents detailed secret payments to silence victims of abuse, cover-ups of financial irregularities involving charitable funds, and, most shocking of all, evidence that several working royals have been aware of these activities for years without taking action. Names she recognized, people she had come to respect and admire, were implicated in what appeared to be a systematic effort to protect the monarchy's reputation at any cost. Catherine's hands trembled as she read letter after letter from individuals whose lives had been destroyed by powerful figures within the royal circle. Their pleas for help had been met with legal threats and financial settlements that bought their silence. Children who had been harmed, employees who had been exploited, and charitable beneficiaries who had been defrauded, all silenced by an institution that publicly championed justice and service. When William returned from his morning meeting, he found Catherine sitting in their garden, the documents spread across the wrought iron table, tears streaming down her face. She had always been the strong one, the one who adapted gracefully to royal life, who found ways to modernize traditions without losing their meaning. Seeing her so shaken immediately put him on high alert. "Kate, what's happened?" he asked, settling beside her on the bench they had placed beneath the old oak tree, where they often retreated when the pressures of royal life became overwhelming. Without speaking, she handed him the first document, a letter dated 1987 from a young woman claiming that a senior royal had sexually assaulted her at a charity gala. The letter was marked with handwritten notes in the margin. Offer £50,000. Ensure NDA is watertight. This cannot reach the press. William's face grew pale as he continued reading. Each document revealed another layer of institutional corruption that had been hidden from public view for decades. Most disturbing was the realization that this wasn't ancient history. Some of the cover-ups had occurred during his own lifetime, while he was being groomed to one day lead this same institution. "How long have you known about this?" he asked quietly, though he already knew the answer from her expression. "I just found out this morning," Catherine replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Amanda brought these from the archives." "William, if this is true, if even half of this is true, then everything we've been working toward, everything we've promised the British people." She couldn't finish the sentence, but William understood. They had spent years rebuilding public trust in the monarchy after the scandals of previous generations. They had positioned themselves as a new kind of royal family, transparent, accountable, and genuinely committed to service rather than self-interest. The idea that they might unknowingly be perpetuating a system built on silencing victims and covering up crimes was unbearable. William stood and began pacing, a habit he had developed when processing difficult information. "We need to verify these documents first. There's always a possibility they're forgeries or that we're missing crucial context." Catherine nodded, but her instincts told her these documents were authentic. The level of detail, the official letterheads, the signatures she recognized, it all had the ring of truth that forgeries typically lacked. More importantly, it explained certain behaviors and patterns she had noticed, but never questioned. The way certain topics were quickly changed during family meetings. The nervous energy that surrounded discussions of historical matters. The elaborate legal teams that seemed to handle issues that were never fully explained to younger family members. They spent the rest of the morning going through every document, cross-referencing dates with public records and news events they remembered. A pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. Whenever a potential scandal threatened to surface, it was quickly and efficiently buried through a combination of legal pressure, financial settlements, and media manipulation. The machinery of cover-up was so well-oiled that it operated almost automatically. The most heartbreaking documents were the letters from victims who had initially sought help from the royal family, believing in the institution's commitment to justice and moral leadership. Their faith had been met with cold legal calculations and financial offers designed to make problems disappear rather than address them. Reading these personal accounts, Catherine felt a profound sense of betrayal on behalf of these individuals. By afternoon, they had made a decision that would have seemed impossible just hours earlier. They could not, in good conscience, continue their royal duties while this information remained hidden. But they also couldn't simply go public with unverified accusations that could destroy lives and institutions. They needed time to investigate properly, to understand the full scope of what they had discovered, and to determine the best path forward. The decision to step back from their official duties wasn't made lightly. William understood the constitutional implications better than anyone. As second in line to the throne, his absence from royal engagements would be noticed immediately. Catherine's withdrawal would be equally conspicuous, especially given her recent high-profile campaigns and public commitments. But they both felt that continuing to represent an institution they could no longer trust would be a betrayal of everything they claimed to stand for. That evening, they called their closest advisors, not the official palace staff who might feel obligated to protect institutional interests, but the small circle of friends and confidants who had supported them through their courtship, marriage, and early years of royal life. The conversations were difficult and emotional. Some urged them to work within the system to address these problems gradually. Others supported their instinct to step back until they could fully understand what they were dealing with. The children sensed something was wrong during dinner. George, at 11, was old enough to pick up on the tension between his parents, while Charlotte and Louis remained blissfully unaware of the larger implications, but noticed the unusual solemnity in the household. William and Catherine made a conscious decision not to burden their children with this knowledge until they had a clearer understanding of how to proceed. As night fell, they walked through the grounds of their home, discussing the impossible choice they faced. Staying silent about what they had discovered felt like complicity, but speaking out without proper investigation could cause irreparable damage to innocent people and institutions. The weight of their position, as future monarchs, as parents, as people who had dedicated their lives to public service, pressed down on them with crushing force. They decided to take 48 hours to investigate further before making any public statements or decisions about their future roles. But even as they made this plan, both William and Catherine understood that they had already crossed a line. The knowledge they now possessed had fundamentally changed their relationship with the monarchy and their understanding of their own roles within it. The next morning, they would begin the most difficult investigation of their lives, not just into the documents they had discovered, but into the very nature of the institution they had sworn to serve. And with each revelation, their silence would become more profound, more noticeable, and more powerful than any words they could speak. The second day of their private investigation began before dawn. While the rest of the royal household slept, William and Catherine met with Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a forensic document analyst who had worked with Scotland Yard for over 20 years. Dr. Hartwell had been recommended by a mutual friend who understood the need for absolute discretion, and she arrived at Adelaide Cottage under the cover of an early morning meeting about Catherine's upcoming charity work. Dr. Hartwell's preliminary examination of the documents confirmed Catherine's worst fears. The papers were authentic, dating from the 1950s through to 2019. The handwriting samples matched known examples from the individuals in question, and the paper stock, ink, and official seals all checked out under microscopic examination. More disturbing was her professional assessment that these documents represented only a fraction of a much larger archive. In my experience, Dr. Hartwell explained quietly as they sat in William's study, when you find evidence of systematic cover-up like this, what you're seeing is typically the tip of the iceberg. These documents survived either by accident or because someone deliberately preserved them. There are likely many more cases that left no paper trail at all. William had spent the night researching the legal implications of what they had discovered. As a future head of state, he had access to constitutional experts who could provide guidance without fully revealing the nature of his inquiry. What he learned was sobering. If even a fraction of these allegations were true, it could constitute criminal conspiracy spanning multiple decades. The legal obligations were clear. They had a duty to report potential crimes to the appropriate authorities. But the political and constitutional ramifications were staggering. A criminal investigation into the royal family would likely trigger a constitutional crisis that could threaten the monarchy's very existence. The ripple effects would extend far beyond Britain, potentially destabilizing the Commonwealth realms and fundamentally altering the country's system of government. Catherine had taken a different approach to understanding their situation. She had spent hours reaching out to victim advocacy organizations, using her connections from years of charity work to speak confidentially with experts who specialized in institutional abuse and cover-ups. What she learned painted a devastating picture of how powerful institutions typically handled such scandals. The pattern is always the same, explains Sarah Mitchell, director of a prominent victims' rights organization who had agreed to speak with Catherine on condition of anonymity. First, they deny. Then they minimize. Then they offer money to make it go away. The victims are portrayed as attention seekers or opportunists, while the institution positions itself as the real victim of false allegations. By the time any truth emerges, years have passed, evidence has disappeared, and public interest has moved on to other scandals. Catherine found herself thinking about the hundreds of people she had met during her royal engagements, abuse survivors, families seeking justice, communities failed by institutions they had trusted. She had offered them comfort and support, had promised that their voices mattered, had assured them that those in power cared about their suffering. The idea that she might have been unknowingly representing an institution that actively silenced similar victims was devastating. Meanwhile, William was grappling with the personal betrayal he felt toward family members who might have been aware of these cover-ups. His father, now King Charles III, had always emphasized the importance of duty and service to the crown above all else. Had this commitment to institutional preservation come at the cost of basic moral principles? And what about his grandmother, the late Queen Elizabeth II, who had been revered for her sense of duty and moral leadership? How much had she known? The couple decided to approach the investigation systematically. They divided the documents into categories: financial irregularities, abuse allegations, and what appear to be broader patterns of institutional corruption. Each category required different expertise and different approaches to verification. For the financial irregularities, William contacted James Morrison, a forensic accountant who had previously worked on high-profile fraud cases. Morrison was bound by professional confidentiality and could examine the documents without knowing their full provenance. His analysis revealed sophisticated money laundering operations that had moved millions of pounds through various royal charities and private accounts over several decades. What you're looking at here, Morrison explained during a secure video call from his London office, is a systematic effort to disguise the source and destination of very large sums of money. The techniques used are consistent with organized financial crime, not simple accounting errors or administrative oversights. Catherine focused on verifying the abuse allegations, perhaps the most sensitive aspect of their investigation. Through her network of contacts in social services and victim advocacy, she was able to confirm that several of the individuals named in the documents had indeed filed complaints with various authorities over the years. However, these complaints had been mysteriously withdrawn or had disappeared from official records. She managed to make contact with 3 survivors who were willing to speak with her confidentially. Their stories were heartbreaking and remarkably consistent with the documentary evidence. They described a pattern of institutional intimidation that began the moment they came forward with their allegations. Legal threats, surveillance, and financial pressure had been used to silence them, while their credibility was systematically undermined through whisper campaigns and media manipulation. One survivor, a woman named Margaret Thompson who had worked for a royal charity in the 1980s, agreed to meet with Catherine in person. Margaret, now in her 60s, had spent decades trying to expose what she had witnessed, but had been repeatedly defeated by the royal family's legal and public relations machinery. "I was 23 years old when I saw what I saw," Margaret told Catherine during their emotional meeting in a quiet cafe in central London. "I believed that if I told the truth, justice would prevail. I was young and naive. I didn't understand that some institutions are too powerful to hold accountable, at least through normal channels." Margaret's account provided crucial corroboration for several of the documents William and Catherine had discovered. More importantly, she helped them understand the human cost of the cover-ups they were investigating. Lives had been destroyed, careers ended, and families torn apart, all to protect the reputation of an institution that claimed to serve the public good. As their investigation expanded, William and Catherine began to notice subtle changes in their daily routine that suggested their activities had not gone entirely unnoticed. Security briefings became more detailed, with additional emphasis on maintaining confidentiality about their movements and meetings. Staff members who had previously been casual and friendly became more formal and watchful. Phone calls seemed to take longer to connect, and some of their usual communication channels experienced unexplained technical difficulties. The realization that they might be under surveillance by their own protection team was deeply unsettling. It raised questions about how much the palace hierarchy already knew about their investigation and what measures might be taken to prevent them from pursuing it further. The couple began taking extraordinary precautions, using public locations for sensitive meetings and communicating through encrypted channels that bypassed official royal communication systems. Their investigation also revealed the sophisticated public relations operation that had been used to shape public perception around various royal scandals over the years. Press releases that seemed spontaneous had actually been carefully crafted months in advance. Media coverage that appeared balanced and independent had been orchestrated through a network of friendly journalists and editors who received exclusive access in exchange for favorable coverage. Most disturbing was the evidence of how social media and digital platforms had been manipulated to silence critics and promote positive narratives about the royal family. Sophisticated bot networks, coordinated harassment campaigns, and strategic information warfare had been deployed against anyone who threatened to expose inconvenient truths about royal behavior or institutional practices. By the end of their second day of investigation, William and Catherine had confirmed their worst fears about the authenticity and scope of the documents they had discovered. But they had also gained a much deeper understanding of the powerful forces that would be arrayed against them if they chose to pursue this matter publicly. The machinery of cover-up that had operated for decades was still very much in place and would undoubtedly be deployed against them if they posed a threat to institutional interests. That evening, as they put their children to bed, both William and Catherine were acutely aware that their lives had fundamentally changed. They could never again participate in royal events with the same innocence or confidence they had felt just days earlier. Every speech about justice, every visit to victim support organizations, every public appearance would now carry the weight of their terrible knowledge. The question was no longer whether they had discovered evidence of serious wrongdoing. That was now beyond doubt. The question was what they were prepared to sacrifice in order to pursue justice for the victims they had learned about. Their titles, their position, their family security, their children's future, all of it was now at risk. As they prepared for the most difficult conversation of their marriage, both William and Catherine understood that their next decision would not only determine their own future, but could fundamentally alter the course of British history. The silence they had maintained for 2 days was about to become much more profound, much more public, and much more dangerous. On the morning of October 17th, 2024, the British public first noticed something was wrong when Prince William failed to appear at the scheduled dedication ceremony for the new Royal Naval College at Greenwich. Catherine was expected to attend a children's hospital opening in Manchester that same afternoon. Neither appeared, and neither offered any explanation. The official statements released by Kensington Palace were brief and unprecedented in their vagueness. Their Royal Highnesses the Prince and Princess of Wales have temporarily suspended their public engagements for personal reasons. No further details will be provided at this time. No mention of illness, family emergency, or any of the usual explanations that had historically accompanied royal schedule changes. Media speculation began immediately. The couple's marriage was scrutinized for signs of strain. Their children's activities were analyzed for clues. Royal correspondents who had enjoyed years of cooperative relationships with palace press officers found themselves shut out completely. Phone calls weren't returned, emails went unanswered, and the usual informal briefings that helped shape royal coverage simply stopped happening. Behind the scenes, William and Catherine had made the most difficult decision of their lives. After 3 sleepless nights reviewing evidence and consulting with trusted advisors, they had concluded that they could not continue representing the crown while possessing evidence of systematic institutional wrongdoing. But they had also decided that precipitous public revelations could do more harm than good, potentially destroying innocent people and institutions without guaranteeing justice for victims. Their strategy was unprecedented in royal history. They would use their silence as a form of protest and leverage, creating enough public pressure and constitutional uncertainty to force a proper investigation while avoiding the chaos that immediate public disclosure might create. It was a dangerous gamble that could end their royal careers and potentially destabilize the monarchy itself. The first 24 hours of their silence sent shockwaves through the establishment. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's office contacted Buckingham Palace, seeking clarification about the constitutional implications of the heir to the throne essentially going on strike. King Charles III, who had been briefed about his son's sudden withdrawal from public duties, found himself in an impossible position. As both father and sovereign, he needed to understand what was happening while respecting the independence that William and Catherine had always maintained in their royal work. Catherine's private secretary, Amanda Morrison, found herself at the center of an unprecedented situation. Palace protocol had no precedent for handling working royals who simply refused to explain their absence from duty. Amanda had been instructed to say only that the prince and princess were taking time for personal reflection and that they would communicate directly with the public when appropriate. The media response escalated rapidly from curiosity to concern to alarm. Royal correspondents who had spent years building relationships with the Wales household were completely shut out. Robert Jobson, who had covered the royal family for decades, described the situation as unlike anything I've experienced in 30 years of royal reporting. It's as if William and Catherine have simply vanished from public life without explanation. Social media exploded with theories ranging from marital problems to serious illness to secret political disagreements with the government. Hashtags like hashtag Where Are William and Kate and hashtag Royal Silence began trending globally. International media picked up the story, with American and European outlets speculating about the stability of the British monarchy and the implications for the Commonwealth realms. What the public didn't know was that William and Catherine were using their enforced isolation to continue their investigation with even greater urgency. They had established secure communication channels with several investigative journalists, constitutional lawyers, and victim advocates who could help them understand the full implications of what they had discovered. Through these channels, they learned that their suspicion about being under surveillance was correct. Their phones were being monitored, their movements tracked, and their communications intercepted by palace security services. This confirmation that their own protection team was working to contain their investigation rather than support, it was deeply disturbing and reinforced their decision to maintain absolute public silence while gathering more evidence. Meanwhile, the constitutional implications of their silence were becoming increasingly serious. As second in line to the throne, William's withdrawal from public duties created uncertainty about the line of succession and the continuity of royal functions. Constitutional experts began debating whether the Prince of Wales could be considered to have abdicated his place in the succession through his refusal to perform royal duties. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who had officiated at William and Catherine's wedding and had maintained a close relationship with the couple, requested a private meeting to understand their situation. This meeting, held at a secure location outside London, became one of the few occasions where they broke their public silence to explain their position to someone in authority. Archbishop Welby's response was telling. After reviewing the documents and hearing their account of the investigation, he expressed deep concern not only about the allegations themselves, but about the institutional culture that had allowed such behavior to continue unchecked. What you've discovered, he told them, represent a profound moral crisis that goes far beyond any individual wrongdoing. This is about the soul of an institution that millions of people around the world look to for moral leadership. The Archbishop's support provided crucial validation for their decision to maintain their silence until a proper investigation could be conducted. But it also highlighted the scope of the crisis they were confronting. If the evidence they had gathered was accurate, it would require nothing less than a fundamental transformation of how the royal family operated and how it was held accountable for its actions. By the fourth day of their silence, the political pressure had become intense. Opposition leaders in Parliament began asking questions about the constitutional crisis that appeared to be developing. The Scottish National Party seized on the situation to renew calls for Scottish independence, arguing that the monarchy's instability demonstrated the need for Scotland to chart its own course. King Charles III finally broke his own silence, issuing a statement through Buckingham Palace that read, "His Majesty respects the Prince and Princess of Wales' need for privacy during this difficult time and supports their decision to step back from public duties temporarily while they address personal matters. The king has full confidence in their commitment to their royal roles and to the people they serve. This statement, while supportive, also revealed the deep concern within the royal family about the situation. The use of the phrase difficult time suggested that the palace understood this was more than a routine scheduling issue, while the emphasis on temporary withdrawal indicated hope that the crisis could be resolved without permanent damage to the institution. Behind the scenes, frantic efforts were underway to understand what had prompted William and Catherine's dramatic action. Private investigators were hired to examine their recent activities and contacts. Palace staff who had regular interaction with the couple were interviewed extensively. The discovery of Amanda Morrison's role in providing the initial documents led to her suspension and a broader investigation into the Royal Collection's archive security. The couple's closest friends and advisors found themselves under intense pressure to provide information about William and Catherine's state of mind and intentions. Some received visits from palace officials who made it clear that cooperation would be appreciated and rewarded, while resistance would be remembered. This heavy-handed approach only reinforced the couple's belief that they were dealing with an institution willing to use intimidation to protect its interests. International reaction to the crisis was swift and significant. The Canadian Prime Minister issued a statement expressing concern about the stability of the monarchy that served as Canada's head of state. Australian Republican movements seized on the crisis to renew calls for constitutional change. Even traditionally pro-monarchy publications began questioning whether the institution could survive such uncertainty at its heart. The most significant development came on the 5th day of their silence, when Catherine broke her isolation to make a single, carefully planned public appearance. She visited Margaret Thompson, the abuse survivor she had met earlier, at a hospice where Margaret was receiving treatment for terminal cancer. The visit was unannounced and unofficial, but photographers managed to capture images of the Princess of Wales holding Margaret's hand and speaking intently with her. The photographs, when they appeared in newspapers the next day, provided the first clue to the public about what might be driving the royal couple's unprecedented behavior. Catherine's expression in the images was one of profound sadness and determination. Margaret Thompson's story began to emerge through careful media investigation, providing the first hints that the royal silence might be connected to serious allegations of historical wrongdoing. This subtle revelation changed the entire dynamic of media coverage. Instead of focusing solely on speculation about the couple's marriage or health, journalists began investigating possible institutional scandals that might have prompted their withdrawal. Freedom of information requests were filed seeking historical documents about royal conduct. Victims' rights organizations received increased attention from reporters seeking to understand what might have triggered such a dramatic royal response. The palace response to this shift in media coverage was telling. Instead of the usual denials or clarifications that typically accompanied negative royal stories, there was complete silence. This absence of pushback, so unusual for an institution that typically managed its image aggressively, suggested that whatever William and Catherine had discovered was serious enough that even the palace's sophisticated public relations machinery couldn't effectively counter it. As the first week of their silence drew to a close, William and Catherine faced increasing pressure from family members, government officials, and constitutional experts to either resume their duties or provide some explanation for their absence. But they also had gathered enough additional evidence to confirm that their initial discoveries represented only a small portion of a much larger pattern of institutional wrongdoing. Their investigation had expanded to include potential criminal activity, financial fraud, and systematic abuse of power spanning multiple decades. The scale of what they had uncovered was so significant that they began to question whether the monarchy, as currently constituted, could ever be reformed sufficiently to justify their continued participation. The silence that had begun as a desperate response to shocking discoveries was transforming into something much more profound, a fundamental challenge to the very nature of royal accountability and the relationship between the crown and the people it claimed to serve. The breaking point came on October 25th, 2024, when The Guardian published a carefully researched investigation titled The Royal Files, A Pattern of Silence. The article, based on leaked documents and interviews with multiple sources, revealed the existence of a systematic cover-up operation within the royal household that had operated for over 70 years. While the newspaper couldn't access the specific documents that William and Catherine had discovered, their independent investigation corroborated many of the same patterns and allegations. The Guardian's expose triggered an avalanche of similar investigations by other major news organizations. The BBC launched its own inquiry into historical allegations of royal misconduct. The Times of London published a series examining the financial arrangements used to silence victims. International media outlets began investigating similar patterns in other Commonwealth realms. What had been a localized constitutional crisis in Britain suddenly became a global scandal with implications for monarchies worldwide. For William and Catherine, the public emergence of these stories validated their decision to maintain their silence while gathering evidence. But it also escalated the pressure they faced dramatically. They were no longer dealing with a private family matter or even a domestic political crisis. They were at the center of an international scandal that threatened to destroy the institution they had devoted their lives to serving. The couple's response to this escalation was characteristically principled and devastating in its simplicity. On the morning after The Guardian's investigation was published, they issued their first public statement in over a week. It contained just 23 words. "We stand with all victims of institutional abuse who have been silenced by power. Truth and justice matter more than tradition or convenience." This statement, released simultaneously across all their social media platforms and sent directly to major news organizations, sent shockwaves through the establishment. By explicitly aligning themselves with abuse victims and prioritizing truth over institutional loyalty, William and Catherine had essentially declared war on the palace hierarchy and the system of royal accountability they had inherited. King Charles III's response was swift and revealed the deep divisions that had developed within the royal family. A statement from Buckingham Palace, released just hours after his son's declaration, read, "His Majesty notes the statement from the Prince and Princess of Wales with deep concern. The King believes these matters would be better addressed through proper channels rather than public discourse, and urges all parties to consider the constitutional implications of their actions." This unprecedented public disagreement between the sovereign and his heir created a constitutional crisis unlike anything Britain had experienced since the abdication crisis of 1936. Constitutional experts struggled to understand the legal implications of the Prince of Wales essentially declaring his independence from palace authority while maintaining his position in the line of succession. The immediate political consequences were severe. Prime Minister Sunak found himself fielding questions in Parliament about the government's response to what was essentially a royal civil war. Opposition leaders demanded a full parliamentary inquiry into the allegations that had triggered the crisis. Scottish independent supporters saw an opportunity to argue that the monarchy's instability demonstrated the need for constitutional change. But the most significant impact was on public opinion. Polling conducted in the days following William and Catherine's statement showed a remarkable shift in how the British people viewed their future monarchs. While support for the institution of monarchy declined sharply, personal approval ratings for William and Catherine actually increased. The public seemed to distinguish between the couple's moral stance and their institutional role, suggesting that their decision to prioritize truth over tradition resonated with many citizens. This public support emboldened William and Catherine to take their most dramatic step yet. On October 28th, they announced that they would participate in a televised interview with Emily Maitlis, the respected journalist known for her unflinching approach to powerful institutions. The interview, scheduled for prime time on BBC One, would be their first detailed public explanation of their actions and the evidence that had prompted their withdrawal from royal duties. The palace's response to this announcement revealed the depth of the crisis. Legal representatives for the royal household sought court injunctions to prevent the broadcast, arguing that it could prejudice potential legal proceedings and violate constitutional conventions about royal political neutrality. When these efforts failed, palace officials reportedly considered more drastic measures, including the possibility of stripping William and Catherine of their royal titles. The interview itself, broadcast on October 30th, 2024, became one of the most watched programs in British television history. An estimated 32 million people tuned in to hear William and Catherine explain their unprecedented decision to break with royal protocol and speak directly to the public about institutional wrongdoing. Catherine opened the interview with words that would be remembered for generations. "We swore an oath to serve the British people with integrity and honor. When we discovered that the institution we represent had systematically betrayed those principles, we faced an impossible choice: remain silent and become complicit, or speak out and risk everything we have worked to build." Over the course of 90 minutes, the couple methodically presented their case. They showed selected documents to camera with victim identities and other sensitive details redacted to protect privacy. They explained their investigation process and the additional evidence they had gathered. Most powerfully, they shared their personal journey from shock and disbelief to moral certainty about the need for fundamental institutional change. William's most memorable moment came when Maitlis asked about his relationship with his father and the broader royal family. "I love my father and I respect the crown. But love and respect don't require blind loyalty to corruption. If the monarchy is to survive and deserve public support, it must be held to the same standards of accountability as any other institution in our society." The couple also announced the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Foundation, an independent organization that would provide support for victims of institutional abuse and advocate for transparency and accountability in powerful institutions. They committed to donating their personal wealth to fund this foundation and to step back from all royal duties until a full independent investigation into the allegations had been completed. The immediate aftermath of the interview was chaotic. Demonstrations erupted outside Buckingham Palace, with some protesters calling for the abolition of the monarchy, while others held signs supporting William and Catherine's moral stance. Parliamentary leaders from all parties called for emergency sessions to address the constitutional crisis. International allies expressed concern about the stability of Britain's governmental system. King Charles III's response came after 3 days of apparent deliberation and consultation with constitutional experts, government officials, and Commonwealth leaders. In a televised address to the nation, he announced the establishment of an independent royal commission on institutional accountability, headed by a panel of respected judges, academics, and civil rights advocates. The commission would have unprecedented access to royal archives and the authority to investigate all allegations of wrongdoing within the royal household. More significantly, Charles announced immediate reforms to royal accountability mechanisms, including the appointment of an independent ombudsman for royal conduct, mandatory annual audits of royal finances, and new protocols for handling allegations of misconduct that would prioritize victim support over institutional protection. The king's address also included a direct acknowledgement of his son and daughter-in-law's actions. The Prince and Princess of Wales have demonstrated the moral courage that our institution needs if it is to earn continued public trust. Their willingness to prioritize truth over convenience has forced us to confront uncomfortable realities that we should have addressed long ago. The establishment of the Royal Commission and the King's public support for his son's actions marked the beginning of the resolution phase of the crisis. William and Catherine agreed to cooperate fully with the Commission's investigation while maintaining their suspension of royal duties. Public opinion polling showed growing support for their stance, with many citizens expressing hope that the crisis might lead to meaningful reform of an institution that had often seemed disconnected from contemporary values. The international implications continued to unfold over the following months. Several Commonwealth realms announced their own investigations into royal conduct within their jurisdictions. The crisis accelerated Republican movements in Australia and other nations where the British monarchs served as head of state. But it also demonstrated the possibility that constitutional monarchies could reform themselves in response to legitimate criticism. For William and Catherine personally, their decision to break their silence had profound consequences. They faced ongoing security threats from extremists who viewed their actions as treasonous. Their children required additional protection at school as media attention intensified. Their relationship with some family members remained strained, though private communications suggested that several royals privately supported their stance, even if they couldn't say so publicly. But the couple also experienced something they described as profound relief. The burden of carrying terrible secrets while maintaining public facades had been devastating. Their willingness to risk everything for their principles had strengthened their marriage and given them a sense of moral clarity they had never experienced during their traditional royal roles. The Royal Commission's investigation, which would continue for over a year, ultimately validated most of the couple's allegations while uncovering additional evidence of institutional failures spanning multiple decades. The Commission's final report, published in late 2025, led to criminal charges against several individuals, significant financial compensation for victims, and fundamental reforms to how the royal family operated and was held accountable. William and Catherine eventually returned to royal duties, but on their own terms and with new protocols that ensured their independence and ability to speak truth to power. Their actions had fundamentally changed the nature of modern monarchy, creating new expectations for royal accountability and moral leadership that would influence the institution for generations to come. Years later, historians would point to their week of silence in October 2024 as a pivotal moment when the British monarchy chose evolution over extinction, truth over tradition, and moral courage over comfortable conformity. Their silence had indeed spoken louder than any speech, forcing a thousand-year-old institution to confront its failures and commit to a more honest and accountable future. The story of William and Catherine's brave decision to prioritize justice over duty became a defining moment not just for the British royal family, but for constitutional monarchies worldwide. It demonstrated that even the most traditional institutions could change when confronted with moral courage, and that sometimes the most powerful statement is not what you say, but what you refuse to accept in silence.